Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Sommer, shareholder at ZwillGen, as well as Jud Welle. He's partner of the privacy and cybersecurity group at Goodwin, and we're here to discuss AI, how it's impacting data governance and privacy, as well as cybersecurity litigation trends. It is great to have the both of you with us. Jud, welcome back to the show. And this all comes around data governance and risk management when we think about how emerging technologies such as AI are, shaping the way technology looks today.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting moment, because what companies are struggling to do is move as quickly as they need to from a business perspective to roll out these AI technologies. They need to maintain competitive advantage in their industries. And there's just such a rise in demand for these services. So if people are doing it down the street, you're certainly going to be implementing it. The challenge is if the implementation gets ahead of governance and risk management, because AI systems are just information systems, and as we know from many years of experience, it's very difficult to secure systems when you have all these threat actors, looking to launch ransomware attacks and essentially to extort companies. So, what we do is we're looking to this as a moment and an opportunity, because everyone is focused on new technology, to go back to some of the bedrock principles of risk management. Yeah. And some of this is extending things you're doing. Sometimes it's plussing up those things. But AI presents its own unique set of risks on top of traditional cybersecurity risk. Yeah,
and Jake, part of the challenge is too, this technology is moving quickly, whereas the law doesn't necessarily keep up as quick. So when you think about cyber litigation trends and how that's evolving, it certainly does make it more challenging as well.
Right, there's a little bit of everything new is old again, if you will. We have all of this new development in AI, and we don't have law keeping up. There's not a federal law on AI in the United States yet. States have passed laws, but they're in their infancy, or they cover slices of the AI framework. So what we're seeing from state AGs and from regulators and from plaintiffs' counsel is looking for some law that fits, and they're looking for older laws to fit. And it makes the compliance that we're talking about today a little bit harder, because it's a little bit more difficult to tell what's coming next when there's not just one big governing statute that's going to do it. So keeping up with that and keeping up with your data governance and scaling to match the laws that might be changing behind you and are a little bit unpredictable at this point, because they aren't coming at a federal and a predictive level, at least in the United States yet.
Right, because you have all those jurisdictions that are competing with each other. So if you want to be as compliant as possible, Jud, why not just base your framework around something like GDPR as an example?
It's exactly what a lot of our clients are doing. But I want to draw a distinction between compliance and security, because companies are going to want to achieve both of those. If you're working backward from a particular set of laws, you're thinking about, what's my legal risk there? Will I get in trouble with a regulator? Will I get sued by plaintiffs' counsel? But at the same time, you can be, having all the right policies in place, but if you're not doing the right things to actually keep your company secure from the latest threats, you could find yourself in a very good footing on a compliance standpoint, but find yourself vulnerable to any number of intrusion risks, and that's what we see. And an organization wants to be thinking about looking at the challenge through both of those lenses, right? You need the lawyers, and you need risk, and you need compliance, but you also want to have people that are experienced in securing the networks, and don't be afraid to sort of go outside your team to get that experience, because fortunately not every company has had to go through one of these situations, but there are obviously resources out there to inform you about how to properly configure systems and how to fortify your defenses.
I think we might see a culture shift where companies start to think more privacy first and cyber first when it comes to prod design. At least that's what I'm hoping. The implementation, whether it was internal, external, these emerging generative AI platforms, I feel like it was rushed just to say that the product was available without necessarily thinking about the problem that needs to be solved, and with that cyber first mindset. I think in a couple of years we'll start to see where some of those vulnerabilities lie.
Yeah, it's called privacy by design, or security by design, and it is absolutely the best way to go, because it's very hard to roll these things out and then all of a sudden realize, oh wait, we have to reverse engineer this. So better to get it right. I'll also say that the trend we're seeing is that the regulators are looking for that governance layer. They're looking for thoughtfulness around privacy compliance and cyber resilience to be designed in there. And they want to see accountability in management. You know, part of what we're here talking about today is cyber risk management. That's exactly how the SEC looked at it when it came out with its cyber rules a few years ago that are requiring all public companies to make a specific disclosure on their annual reports to investors about how they manage cyber risk. So do they sort of take a check the box exercise where they just stack a bunch of tools up and say we're cyber secure, or do they actually have processes in place with oversight from the board of directors and real accountability at the executive leadership level?
Yeah, and Jake, you bring up an interesting trend here as it relates to cyber litigation. If there is a breach and the government needs access to some of this data, what does that look like? I mean, do you apply wiretapping, you know, statutes to that, or I mean, has it evolved quick enough, or how are you making those decisions?
Yeah, so there's two parts of this. One is I'm looking to the government for help when I have a breach or I have something and I want to work with the government. That is an interesting call, and we advise on that all the time. Should you talk to the government, or is it time to talk to the government or not? Because it brings on a whole nother layer. They have their own enforcement priorities and their own investigation to do. In that instance, you do have to look before you share data with the government, particularly when it's data about your users. You have to make sure you go through a process. Is it necessary to share it with the government? Should the government come to you with a subpoena? Should they come to you with legal process to make sure that your users' data is being protected before you hand it over to the government as part of a breach? That's a very important decision to make. How much of that can you get over to them? There's a second part that I think maybe you're also asking about is, well, what does the government do with all of these new threats and all of these new ways that people can use AI to hack someone, or use AI to create misinformation, or use AI to create things that are threats to companies? So there's, one hand is sharing when I'm investigating my own threat, my own breach. Another is how does law enforcement investigate? That is still mostly governed by the laws we've had since 1986.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when you do incident response, I mean, you're going to involve law enforcement and the FBI as an example anyway.
It's look before you leap, and it is context specific, as Jake rightly pointed out. In the incident response context, the priorities of the government are more aligned with that of a corporate victim. There are some investigations that maybe have a different character to them, where there's data, you know, that large companies may have, large platforms may have, and that's part of a different interaction with the government. But yes, absolutely. We recommend that our clients strongly consider voluntarily reaching out to the FBI and providing not necessarily customer information, but the sort of forensic information, the artifacts, the breadcrumbs that relate to how the threat actor got into the system, right, to help law enforcement, help companies down the road defend themselves, and to be able to sort of create signatures and other mitigations to really you know, halt this activity.
One thing that's interesting, actually we spoke about it on another panel yesterday, is how the threat environment is evolving, where they're not necessarily going to the enterprise specifically, but to supply chains as an example, or going to vendors as an example. So they're not just getting access to one company, but through the third parties getting access to more companies.
I was speaking with a client just yesterday,
yeah,
you know, because what we have to do is not every company can spend the same amount, say on cybersecurity. Right. It all depends on your risk profile. But if you are a platform and you're going to be providing services, technology services to enterprise, there's going to be high expectations on you from your customers that you're going to employ proper data governance and cyber risk management. But then also you're more of a target from the threat actors, because why pick off, as you mentioned, Jill, 100 companies when you can just go to the source, right? One of those critical vendors.
You know, it's interesting. You had brought up deepfakes before as an example. What about copyright infringement or IP, and who owns what as this AI environment continues to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the big litigation trends in AI right now, and we don't really know yet because the cases are just getting started. Mm-hmm. And the major question is, if you are developing an AI model, how much of content can you use, and is it fair use to train? The argument is, I'll make it as quick and simple as possible. For the AI companies, the argument is we're just reading the materials, just like you or I might read the materials, and then we learn from it. And the way it goes into the AI system is it breaks it down like our brains break it down, and it stores it, and then we create something new with that as a background. Everyone who makes rock music has heard the Beatles at this point. Right. There's a little bit of the Beatles in all of rock music, but they would say, you just learned from listening to the Beatles, you didn't copy it. The rights holders are saying, no, you make a copy when you put it into the AI. It's a computer. It makes a copy. It doesn't read it and absorb it like a human does. That's different. That's copyright infringement. And so bringing that sort of stuff in, there's a copyright layer. And then I think what you're talking about with deep fakes, there's the idea, well, you're faking one of us, right? There's now enough video and enough sound of us to reliably, certainly you and now me, to fake my voice and probably fake my face. And the question is, what rights do I have in that? I don't own the copyright to the show, but I should own something in my face. And how can we, what tools do we give to the victims, both the victims whose face is used and to the victims who are the victims of deepfake? I think that's a big part of AI that we're going to learn a lot about in the next 6 months, I think, when some of these rulings come out. How much protection is there for creators who write things and have their data loaded into trading on AI? And then another part is, what laws are we going to use and how are we going to deal with the deepfake threat? Because it is a real and true threat.
Well, it's interesting, the example that you gave where, we're just ingesting the information, right? And it's thinking about it and then there's an output associated. It almost reminds me when you think about content moderation, right? Where we're just the intermediary. We are not the publisher, right?
Right.
So and it sounds the same as that, where it's taking somewhat of the onus off of the intermediary.
Yeah, I mean, we did for the longest time on the, I think that's an interesting analogy. So on the content moderation side of things, we have a law, Section 230, and that's what lets the social media sites of the world not be held liable when I put something on Facebook.
Right.
If I defame someone, they're not liable for my defamation. It's the grease of the wheels of the internet. Without that, these companies would be sued all of the time. AI is a little different version of that. You're right, because now you're taking what someone else did, but you're doing something new and creative with it every time the AI responds to a prompt. And how that Section 230 idea interacts with AI and how much we're going to make the AI model creators responsible for the output of the AI and whether it's accurate, whether it defames someone, whether it's obscene or something, how much we put on the AI and how much do we put on the person who's putting the prompt into the AI and trying to get it to say something back to them. That is going to be an interesting legal question.
I think so too, and the challenge is too, a lot of it is very ambiguous, right? So who's to determine what unreasonable means, right? You can have the word unreasonable, in the legislation itself, but it's very subjective.
It is, and that reasonable standard has been around for a while, and it is the benchmark against which a lot of state regulators will look at companies for implementing security controls. It's also the standard that'll prevail in civil lawsuits where plaintiffs are suing companies for not having implemented reasonable security measures. And no one really has exactly a litmus test for what that means. But one of the things that companies can do is they can align to some of these industry standards and frameworks that have been around for a while.
And that is exactly what I was going to ask you next. Why not CISA, NIST, use those frameworks that are industry, across multiple sectors? Why not try and have more consistent framework? And it doesn't have to be just large enterprise. It could be companies of any size that could adopt pieces of that or all of it.
Yeah, the NIST cybersecurity framework is exactly that example. It actually came out more than a decade ago, and it was really there to impose standards for the management of federal government information systems. It does not impose any requirements on the private sector. However, companies were hungry for some guidance, and so a lot of them over time had reached to that standard, that cybersecurity framework. And over the years, it has become almost a de facto, I wouldn't say requirement, but it's a compass, right? It's something that helps guide and steer and organize conversations.
Right.
Because you have a lot of stakeholders in competition for resources, and the ability to be able to look at a program and build it in a thorough manner, and also to communicate to business partners and to management and to the board about why does our cyber program need these things? If we have multi-factor, we're secure, right? A lot of non-technical executives and stakeholders are holding the purse strings, and so it's useful to be able to refer out to something like that, like a standard that others are following.
From a business perspective, when you think about the model itself, it might almost be, okay, we're going to contract with you, or we'll look at deals with you if you have this particular framework in place, because we feel secure being one of your partners if we can trust that your security is on par with ours. I think it's going to start to be more of a factor when you think about making those business decisions.
The third party and vendor risk is a key component of a cybersecurity risk management program, and it is only going to become more critical in the age of AI. We have so many vendors now providing the infrastructure, providing the models, There are obligations and dependencies going almost in every direction. Just being able to map out who all your vendors are. And this is where good governance around AI comes into play, because if you're not seizing the opportunity to at least have some governance around AI, your employees are going to bring all kinds of vendors, services and tools into your environment without you knowing about it. And that's the shadow IT or shadow AI problem. So that also, that risk drives a lot of companies to engage with AI now, even if they're not particularly AI forward.
Right. It's almost like, Jake, that private sector is acting almost like self-regulatory organizations.
Yeah, there is a lot of that. I mean, I've seen that a lot in my practice. Anytime something new happens, self-regulation can help deal with the future regulation. Even if that regulation is coming, your own self-regulation can inform legislators, oh, well, that works or that doesn't work. We're already doing it. Legislate kind of what we've already done. But I want to go back a little bit to the cybersecurity to make sure we're talking about there's two sides of the coin. One is your own internal use. How are your vendors using AI? How's your data going into AI? That is what we have the NIST framework for, that a lot of companies have adopted. There's a lot of rules around it. There's another one, which is your outward facing. If you're a company that is outward facing on AI, you're not using it yourself for your own things, but you're actually offering it to your customers. That is where I think there's a lot of challenges to what does cybersecurity mean in that instance. When I'm interacting with your company's AI, how do I deal with that? How do I make it safe? Well, what are the standards to make it safe? Is it content-based? Will it spit out private information of individuals that maybe got into it in training, et cetera? And that framework is one that it's very exciting to me because we're inventing it now.
Right.
And it is a fundamentally different threat. Like, this is the threat of the harm of what you're telling someone versus the threat of the harm of what are they going to steal from me, right? Traditional cybersecurity of your systems is what are they going to steal? What data are they going to steal and take? The AI is there's going to be a little bit of what data are they going to steal, if there's personal data in there, but how might they harm themselves by interacting with the AI? Will the AI give them bad financial advice? Will it give them bad medical advice? Will it tell them to do things to themselves that are harmful, self-harm? And that security is a different security. It's cybersecurity, you're interacting with a computer, but it's different. It's much more like the standard tort that we've been dealing with for years and years and years.
I mean, Jud, you can make the argument, well, you took financial literacy advice off of someone from TikTok, and it wasn't necessarily the right advice, and you're an influencer at the age of 21, perhaps hasn't been through a volatile environment like we're experiencing now. If you take that advice, or if you take, only go to a generative AI platform for therapy, and it's not perhaps the right advice. I mean, how do you protect people from themselves?
Yeah, I think that's where the regulators' appetite to police that behavior, right? We run into this all the time with our technology clients who are providing platforms, providing services. There's a shared responsibility, right, with the user and the holder of the platform. And it's not always clear in terms of how far the obligation for the technology provider goes. But I like the way Jake suggested we think about this, because the governance layer and the risk management layer for AI has to be much more broad than just intrusions in cybersecurity or the leaking of private information, because you have additional harms, additional risks. And you also just have the inherent problem that AI systems don't deliver 100% accurate results. We know they hallucinate. We know over time there's a drift. There can be misalignment between what we wanted them to do and what they actually do. So what companies are going to have to do on top of the traditional challenges of securing data, protecting data, they're going to have a mechanism for monitoring and detecting AI incidents, which could have these fascinating, attention-grabbing scenarios, right, where the AI tells you to do something that's horrible, right? But just the fact that it's not accurate, it's not delivering the results, or maybe it performed really well in testing, but now that it's out in the real world, there's all these new scenarios that are causing it to go off the rails, frankly. And so companies that are really relying on this for significant outcomes for consumers particularly, because that's where the regulatory focus will be brought to bear, they're going to have to keep tabs on the AI. They're going to have to understand how it performs over time.
All right, and Jake, to wrap up here, is there an example of a state that is putting some AI regulatory framework in place?
Yeah, I mean, from the state perspective, the one that drives a lot of tech regulation is California. And California has an AI Transparency Act that they are in the process of implementing that's it doesn't really hit the two issues we're talking about in a strong way, but it wants you to tell people more about what went into your model. what your training data was, how does the model work. And this, to me, it has some appeal. If you think about it from a risk management standpoint at a company, you really should know more about these AI models you're using. How are they developed? How are they making their decisions? What's their training data? Garbage in, garbage out, right? Is it good data in? Is it good data out? How does this model account for things? How much can I rely on the model? And I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to have one of those incidents where a company has relied on an AI model and it's wrong, and they're going to ask questions about what the company did to make sure that their reliance was reasonable on what the advice that AI model was giving.
All right, appreciate both of your insights as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.